Hi, everyone, and welcome to a new webinar from Cletmore Languages. My name is Sabrina, and we're pleased to bring you new professional development opportunities. The webinar for today is Education for Sustainable Development in World Language Classroom, incorporating education for sustainable development in the World Language Classroom. As you can see, this is a very important topic for us because on the last anniversary of the company, we actually dedicated ourselves to this particular objective of bringing education for sustainable development. So we're very pleased to have our speaker for today. And before we begin, I would like to mention the rules for this webinar. It will begin at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Please bear in mind that this has been recorded, so you will be able to watch the video and receive the recording with the PowerPoint presentation in a few weeks. The length of the session would be of 60 minutes plus 30 minutes for questions and answers. Please make your questions using the Q&A feature. Due to time constraints, participants will not be able to take turns speaking, and we will answer as many questions as time allows. Also, in case you're interested in receiving a certificate for professional development purposes, please fill the form. We're going to send a link in the chat right now, so you can fill that form with your full name and your email, and we will give you that alongside with the PowerPoint presentation and the recording. That being said, I would love to present our speaker for today, Britta Kaelin. She received her PhD in German literature from the University of Cincinnati. She serves as Associate Professor of German and Director of Graduate Studies in the School of Modern Languages at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Georgia. She has published numerous articles on German and Austrian authors, Christa Wolf, Günter Grass, Elfried Jelinek, Marlene Struitz, and others. Her monograph, The Presentation of Racism in Contemporary German and Austrian Plays, examines sexism, racism, and nationalism in plays by German and Austrian female authors after 1990s. One of her most recent articles, From the Body in Pain to the Body Transformed, Feminist and Trans Readings of Franz Kafka, was published in the Journal of Austrian Studies in 2020. Currently, she's working on a book project about contemporary feminist rewritings of fairy tales in German and Austrian literature. Thank you very much for being with us today, Britta.
Thank you, Sabrina, for the kind introduction and for inviting me to do the webinar. Can you all hear me? Is that good? Okay. All right. Thanks to the audience. Thank you for coming on a weekday evening, when you're busy with other things probably, but I appreciate you being interested in the topic. I hope I can share some information. And obviously, I'm also curious to hear as to what you've already been doing and how you would like to incorporate ESDs into the World Language Classroom. I wanted to tell you a little bit about what we're going to see today. Let me see if I can go to the next slide. So we will talk about what is sustainable development, what is education for sustainable development, how do we incorporate it into the World Language Classroom, how, what can students learn, and how do we assess the learning outcomes. I want to tell you a little bit about my background. So a number of years ago, probably about 10 years ago, I started working with a center at Georgia Tech where I teach. So I teach at a college, and it might be different from high schools, but we also do a lot of outreach to high schools here in Georgia. So we know a little bit about, what's going on at the high school and middle school level. And so I've been working with the Serve, Learn, Sustain Center at Georgia Tech, and you can see that the idea was that it is an academic initiative. They work with all 6 colleges. We are in the Ivan Allen College, that's the liberal arts college, to offer students, but also faculty, staff, opportunities inside, outside the classroom to collaborate with diverse partners across the community, nonprofit, government, academic, and business sectors on key sustainability challenges. And the idea is that we, kind of educate them. They come out of Georgia Tech as globally competent citizens, also cross-culturally competent, and we try to help create sustainable communities. So the center has been very important in my work, and I can tell you a little bit more about this idea of having an RCE. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's a regional center of expertise on education for sustainable development. And so the history is that in response to the United Nations Decade of Education for Sustainable Development, which ended in 2014, the UNU, the United Nations University, called for the development of regional networks for the promotion of education for sustainable development. That's the background, kind of the history. These networks then addressed local sustainable development challenges through research and capacity development, and that was the birth of regional centers of expertise on ESD. Then the RCEs are acknowledged by the United Nations University based on recommendations of the Ubuntu Committee of Peers for the RCEs, which consists of signatories of the Ubuntu Declaration signed in 2002. So again, that is background information as to how I started also using education for sustainable development in my classes. We have a center here in Greater Atlanta. That means there are several colleges, but also not educational institutions. It is working together. That means we collaborate with faculty, but also with community partners and corporations in the area on how to improve or how to address certain issues in the area. I'm on a committee, it's called the Higher Education Learning Committee, where we get together with other faculty and speakers and then talk about issues that they either address in their research or in their everyday work, and we find solutions to these local problems. And here you see it's a screenshot. It's not a very good one, but you can see that in the United States, there are, I think, about 11 RCEs right now, and you may be close to one of these, so you can always get in touch with them and ask, what are they doing? How can you contribute? We have a youth network that does a lot of interesting things. They work on renewable energies in subdivisions. They kind of have lots of projects that they work on. And you see, this is only the Americas. So there's also for Europe and the Asia Pacific and Africa and Middle East, different groups of RCEs. I, for example, have worked together with RCEs in Germany. So there are several there. And so we've gone, when we did the study abroad program, we've gone to an RCE, and they actually then did a lecture for us and told us about the research that they were doing. And it was e-mobility, electric mobility in the Balkan area. So around the in the Baltic Sea area. So that's a little bit of the background for the RCEs. And then, so the class that I just taught this semester, and I've been teaching it for many years in the summer program, but this was the first time that it was an undergraduate and graduate cross-listed course. You can see some of the assignments here when we talk about sustainable development. So these are, assignments that the students had to do. They had to write some short essays, respond to readings and YouTube videos. We had written class discussions on Canvas. That is our platform that we use. They wrote a poem about nature, submitted it to a German poetry competition, and some of my students also won awards, won prizes. They did a quiz. They interviewed German speakers in the area, took a test, and then also had oral reports about a sustainability topic. As a group project, they did the short documentary movie about sustainability, and then a final paper. Some of the topics included, for example, the forest and the German imagination, public transportation, recycling, education, consumption, vegetarianism or veganism, the integration of refugees, renewable energies, LGBTQ+ communities, art and sustainability, etc. And that's where I want to tell you a little bit more about it, because I know that some of my colleagues, when they hear sustainability, they always think of environmental sustainability. And when we look at the UN SDGs, it really is more than that. These are some of the highlights for me, I hope for the students too. So we did some PowerPoints with sustainability models, and I will show you some of those because I think that many of us are visual learners, and especially in the world language classroom, this is really helpful for students to see, kind of imagine what it is like the model, and also see then the terms that go with it. And that's how they learn the vocabulary. We'll talk about some definitions, a bit about the history. The students had to do small group discussions. They did a debate where each of them had 30 seconds to present their opinion. Video making, we had an invited speaker who was here in the US, and that worked really well. We discussed a feminist sorority in Austria with students in class, and they had prepared questions prior to the discussion. What we also did was we visited a local art exhibition and had a tour by the artist here in the German Cultural Center. And then that artist also came to visit and did a short video presentation. And I'll show you one of her pictures. She created short videos and photographs to combat climate change. And then we had discussions about art and sustainable life choices. And this is one of her installations, and you may be able to see that she combined pictures taken, portraits taken of indigenous people from the Amazon with indigenous people from Greenland in the Arctic. And so she calls it tropic ice. It's kind of where climate change has its greatest effect right now, where the sea level rises. So these indigenous people are most affected, even though they have hardly contributed to any carbon dioxide emissions. So what is sustainable development? The history, definitions, and models. I assume many of you already know this. I wasn't sure kind of where to start, so I thought I'll bring the basics in, and then we can, in the discussion, talk a little bit about, what to do with it in the Spanish, French, Japanese, German, I don't know, Arabic classroom. So one of the important reports is the Brundtland report, and it was written by, among others, Harlem Brundtland, who was a former Norwegian prime minister. It was written for the World Commission on Environment and Development in 1987, and it is one of the classic standard definitions for sustainable development. And I'll read it to you. It says, sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So this idea that the present generation can, kind of meet its needs, their needs, but cannot compromise the ability of the coming generations of our kids and grandchildren. Just for your information, there was a UN conference on sustainable development in 2012 in Rio. So they had worked on the Millennium Development Goals, and they were retired in 2014. And then they set up the Sustainable Development Goals from 2015 to 2030. So the idea was that at that point, within these 15 years, we make progress towards these goals. And we'll talk about those in just a minute. You have heard about the Paris Climate Agreement in 2016, where most countries agreed that they would try to reduce the carbon emissions. One of the most important aspects, we believe, I guess, at Georgia Tech, and the Center for Serve, Learn, Sustain also introduces their work oftentimes, that it is a question of equity versus equality. And that also has to do with social justice. As you can see here on the left, so equality is, if we're all given the same, the same basic needs, and you can see the, little person cannot see over the fence, and the, the older child can just see over the fence. And then on the side, on the right-hand side, you see equity is when the people, get the support that they need in order to be successful. The middle picture, you can also see, they're all given the same bike, but they cannot really ride it. So only in the picture below where it says equity, they have the right size and the right type of bike. And then you see here social justice. so not everybody can use these slingshots. So this was an important aspect for me and my students, that we always think of, it's not a question of what do we allow people to have, but how do we support them to volunteer work, through certain reforms in the justice system to make it possible for everybody to be successful in this society. Sorry, I'm going back. And now I wanted to come to the different models. So there are a number of them. Please bear with me. It's the 3-pillar model is one of them. You see social, environmental, economic. So this is a very commonly used one. It says sustainability on top. The next one you can see, it says culture on top. And so I guess in the discussions over the last 10, 15 years, there's always been the question, in what way is linguistic and cultural diversity important to keep in mind when we talk about sustainability? And as you know, as world language teachers, we all have different ideas as to what sustainability means. I currently have a student and he interviews several people here in the United States and in Germany. And so what, we think of sustainable development here and in Europe is somewhat different. And that has to do with cultural background, but also with linguistic differences. The next model is the 4-pillar model. And it's the same with the environmental, economic, and social, but it also adds the human and society. And that's, again, where language teachers come in, where we teach cultural competence, proficiency at a level where students understand differences, where intercultural communication comes to play, that they understand, what is being done in Argentina or in Mexico or in France or in Japan that is different from the United States. Then we have the 3 overlapping circles model. It also shows economy, society, environment. And then in the middle, you can see where sustainability lives, so to say. So this is another way of visualizing sustainability for students. And this can be done at all levels. So we at Georgia Tech in the German program, we teach 9 languages currently. In the School of Modern Languages in the German program, we have endorsed the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so, we teach these models at all levels of language instruction. So from first year onwards, all the way to graduate level classes, we incorporate ideas about sustainability, topics, modules, and then we offer classes that focus on this. Here you can see it again, it's spelled out a little more, economic, productivity, business activity, employment, tax burden, and trade. On the social side, it's equity, freedom, community livability, safety, health, values, beliefs, and dignity. And then the bottom one is kind of what comes to mind most frequently: natural resources, energy consumption, solid waste, global greenhouse emissions, air and water pollution, environmental damage, and resource depletion. Next one incorporates cultural sustainability. And again, it is very similar to the model we've seen before, where we had these 3 circles about social, economic, and environmental sustainability. Here, there is this 4th circle, and in the middle, they talk about sustainable development. So how can countries in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, or in the Americas work towards sustainable development by keeping in mind the languages, the cultures, the different values that we have. And the values also, that's an important aspect in world language instruction, how they differ and how that also then relates to what we teach in terms of sustainable development in these countries. Here you see the 3 nested dependencies model. So where the environment is bigger, so it has more importance, then comes society, and then economy is least important. You see here, it's the power of sustainable thinking. There's another one, and I apologize for the screenshot. It's a little blurry. So you have the 4 nested dependency model, where then culture is at the heart of everything, then comes society, environment, and economy. So there it's flipped, right? You can see the environment is not the most important anymore, but culture is first, then comes society, environment, and economy. Then we have the triangle model or the prism model. If you go back, you can see economic, environmental, and institutional, but as well also social. And that's where culture and language comes in. So in what way do I understand something differently from somebody, who teaches Spanish or who speaks Spanish? So how do I think of sustainable development and environmental protection differently? And we've had good experiences in the classroom where we read short text and newspaper articles with the students, and then they expressed, oh, that is, kind of not how we would do it here in the United States. So they see that and they're interested in learning more about how it is done in other countries. There's also the bullseye Mickey Mouse model where you have, here economy and society, same, and then environment. So it's just, kind of in the middle rather than down. And then on the other side, you have the Mickey Mouse model where economy is the biggest and the most important for some. And then society and environment are just the ears that are both very small. Then there are the flower petal models. Some of my students like those because it was easy to add or to take away some of the aspects. Here on the left-hand side, you see how the government comes in, and that is different also, as you know, in different countries. For example, in Germany, the government plays a more important role, and the taxpayers pay, for certain things that they appreciate. While here, there's a different attitude. Here, there are a lot more volunteers, a lot more giving, also financial giving on a level that is more individual. And then on the right-hand side, you can see climate, water, soil, biodiversity are part of this particular model. And then some of the most frequently used models, I just wanted to summarize it since there were so many images, is probably the one on the left-hand side, the social, environment, and economic model, where in the middle is the sustainable part. And then you have the right-hand side, both the three-pillar model and then the overlapping one with economy, society, and environment that has the biggest focus. And then you may have heard of the 5 Ps, that is the people, planet, partnership, peace, and prosperity. And you can see that some of the goals that we will talk about it in a little bit also relate to this. So the people says, you have to end poverty and hunger. Planet is protect our planet's natural resources. Partnership is to implement the agenda through a global partnership. And peace is to foster peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. Again, there's, the important aspect of social sustainability. And then you have prosperity, which means prosperous and fulfilling lives in harmony with nature. So now, what is Education for Sustainable Development? It is a UNESCO initiative, and the goal is to include ESD in K through 12 and higher education. And I just kind of copied and pasted this from a website. You can see it from the UNESCO website. So it says that Education for Sustainable Development is UNESCO's education sector response to the urgent and dramatic challenges the planet faces. And then you see here the collective activities of human beings have altered the Earth's ecosystems. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, so that our very survival seems in danger because of change is more difficult to reverse every day. To contain global warming before it reaches catastrophic levels means addressing environmental, social, and economic issues in a holistic way. And I would argue that this is a great way to have students, deal with it, because that way they can also see in their environment, in their family, in their school, in their community, how different things intersect and can have an effect on each other. I've just copied and pasted some of the UN SDGs. That's one that I do pretty much in the first few sessions when I do these modules. I talk with the students about the SDGs. They don't have to memorize it, but they do learn them after a while. So this is one good vocabulary builder, because you constantly go back, oh, what does SDG, 13, it's climate action, or, any of the others. You can always come back nicely visualized, their numbers, and so it's not that much to learn for the students. Here they are in French, and then I've also listed them in German. And I also have I have a flag that I take to class sometimes. It's a UN SDG flag. I don't know if you can see it. It's like this, it's huge. And sometimes we take pictures with it when we do certain events. I sometimes bring a postcard and show it to the students or the website, and then kind of make it a blank image and then ask the students, which ones are important to them and which ones they think are not that interesting. And obviously there's a lot of criticism also of the UN SDGs, and we talk about, in what way are they outdated and what way do they not address all the issues that we should address. So how do we incorporate now ESD into the world language classroom? And I would suggest to use examples, authentic materials. I assume all of you do that. What I do is I choose short articles and then ask the students to answer some questions. Initially, they do group discussions. We watch YouTube videos, either short news presentations or interviews. We watched a couple of TED Talks and the students write about it, what they liked, what they didn't like. And then we also have music videos and other materials. And I wanted to share with you, I hope that gives you an idea as to, what I have done, what's been successful for me. So they learn the UN SDGs, they identify which SDG is most important to them and which model of sustainability they prefer. So we talk about, what do some of these models not show, or what do they show, or could we even come up with a better model for this idea of sustainable development? The students learn new vocabulary with PowerPoint presentations, some of them that I prepare, and later on the students prepare them. We have group discussions about texts and questions. They do some writing assignments. For example, they had to write a poem about nature. They took a quiz where we asked them, about certain terminology that they needed to talk about sustainable development. And then we asked, what do they find most interesting? What do they not understand? They had to do individual projects. So do an oral report that they could prepare. They shared the PowerPoint with me before class. They presented it. They could have some notes, but they couldn't read off the slides. And then they were asked to answer some questions that the other students would ask, and I would ask them as well. In addition, we did group projects. So they had to create a documentary video about local sustainability issues. Some of them subtitled them if it was necessary, if they were interviewing a non-German speaker, an English speaker. And so some of these video documentaries were about mobility and public transportation in Atlanta. So they went out, they found all sorts of information on the internet about the public transportation system, buses, the Georgia Tech buses, I don't know, suburban, developments, light commuter rail plans that we have here, the Beltline. So ideas also that city and regional planners come up with in order to reduce the usage of cars. The other project was on dining halls on campus. They interviewed someone from there about vegan and vegetarian options, what they do with the trash and with the food waste, what healthy options they have, and whether they use local foods or not. And then one project, which was very interesting, was about art and sustainability. So about graffiti as a tool of social resistance, where a number of images came up, both about the climate change, about nature, but also political topics, faces, but also, just in general, kind of what do people, how do they create art? How do they communicate in an artistic way? And then we talked about, and I thought that was interesting, especially for my students, and I guess in your case too, they come from all sorts of majors and backgrounds and interests. They may want to study something in the university and use their language either as a minor or second major. So we had some students who were doing business or economics. And so we talked about the donut economy. And if you haven't seen it, please take a look at Kate Raworth's TED Talk about the donut economy, how, we cannot go up only, but it kind of has to level out at one point with the profits that companies are making. And you can see here in this donut, the ecological ceiling, social foundation, and then the safe and just space for humanity, the regenerative and distributive economy. You can see inside is basic needs like water, food, health, energy, networks, housing, gender, social equity, political voice, peace and justice, income and work, and education. And then on the outside for the ecological ceiling, you can see climate change, ozone layer, air pollution, biodiversity, land conversion, freshwater withdrawals, nitrogen, phosphorus loading, sorry, I need to move this, chemical pollution, and ocean acidification. And you can see the shortfall and overshoot. So she has presented this as to kind of how we can live, in our world, but create a bit of a different type of economy. You may have heard of triple bottom line. That is something that John Elkington discovered or invented, where he said, we can, as a company, not just look at the financial profit, but we also have to look at the social and economic outcomes. And you can see here, when we look at people, it's the social variables dealing with community, education, equity, social resources, health, well-being, and quality of life. On the planet, it's environmental variables relating to nature, natural resources, water, air quality, energy conservation, and land use. And profit is economic variables dealing with the bottom line and cash flow. So my students like that some companies, especially those who also now employ sustainability officers, that they look at, what are they doing in terms of social and economic outcomes? How can they improve their factories? How can they improve the everyday logistics in order to reduce any waste, in order to reduce carbon emissions? And I can show you here, this is also considered then corporate social responsibility. Excuse me, a sip of water. You can see that the responsibility of a company towards its employees and customers. So the product that I buy, right, is it fair trade or has somebody worked at minimum wage for it? And it describes the voluntary contribution of the economy to the sustainable development that is offered by companies in addition to policies and laws. And on the right-hand side, you see social performance, philanthropy, environmental performance, and corporate governance. So these are some important ideas when you look at companies. You may also have heard of ESG, where investing is kind of dependent, is this investing into fossil fuels, or are these renewable energies that my money is being invested in? Another interesting book is Cradle to Cradle, Remaking the Way We Make Things, where Michael Braungart and William McDonough argue for the fact that we should produce things that can be, that is like a circle that can also be recycled. So we cannot produce anything that has to, end up either in the ocean as plastic or on landfill as plastic waste. So the products that we use or the resources that we use need to be natural. And so they argue that we need to reconsider, what products we buy and produce. And then what can our students learn? So I felt that they can learn a lot of vocabulary. They already know a lot in English in their, kind of language or in Spanish that they speak at home. So they bring a lot of the ideas with them to the classroom, and then they learn the vocabulary in the target language. We've done some exercises where we worked on idiomatic expressions, and they had to do with nature. So the number of expressions, I assume, in other languages as well. There's some, kind of phrases where you have either trees or water or animals or plants in them. So we worked on that. We did some grammar and then theories, kind of what new theories have come up over the last couple of decades. And then during their presentations and their video making, they worked on the intonation and oral expression. They also did writing and presentation skills, and then tried to work on their video making skills. And I think many of them enjoyed that. In terms of theory, we spoke about intersectional theory. And if you haven't seen the TED Talk by Kimberly Crenshaw, please take a look at it. She argues, and this was in the 1980s, that different social and political identities create different modes of discrimination and privilege. So this was, and you can see on the left-hand side, it also talks about religion, but also about language, how we are being, or some speakers are being discriminated depending on how well they speak English or what type of dialect they speak and what abilities they have, what nationality they have, where they come from, what race, what education, what gender, what class, etc. So this is a very interesting topic, and my students enjoyed learning more about it. This goes back to a lawsuit. So she is a law professor. This goes back to a lawsuit at a car company, where then Black women were discriminated both on the basis that they were women, but also because they were Black. So we learned about intersectional theory, and we did all that in German. And here you can see once more, the privilege and the discrimination according to different criteria and identities. You can see heterosexual, European in origin, and then on the other side, upper middle class, and then on the bottom, non-European, persons with disabilities, old, unattractive, English as a second language. So this kind of gave my students also a visual idea as to, kind of how we look at people, how we discriminate based on background. And we did some work on kind of how, gender is part of this, how women engage for a common future. You see here, du bist der Wandel, so you are the change for the future. How can we support girls and women in developing countries so that they can contribute to a better economy and better way of living? The students then also did calculate their carbon footprint. We talked about it, kind of, how much is it when I fly from here to there, or when I take a car, or when I buy such and such a clothing item, or if I eat meat. So there are calculators online where you can calculate your footprint. But we also spoke, and this was very important to me, about their handprints, because the students want to know kind of what can they do, what positive impact can they have, what changes can they make, how can they in their communities and families have act, towards positive sustainable development. So in their careers, when they go out into the world and take on jobs, what type of work do they have to do in there, be it at a company or in a nonprofit, to then support those who need support, to support women or disabled or minorities. How can they do that? Let me just see that I'm in the time. And then we talked about the Anthropocene, the different, so geological epoch around 2000, because the humans have an impact on Earth's geology and ecosystem. So we spoke about, how have things changed and how has the Industrial Revolution and humans' consumption of, be it polyester, fossil fuels, things that are made from things that emit carbon dioxide, how have we changed our environment, both be it in the Arctic, be it in the water, in the oceans, but also on land. And then one discussion we've had, and I've had that more with my summer program than in this class, we talked about degrowth and post-materialism. So in what way do we still live in a society, where we consume too much? And I think especially this generation that goes thrifting, that goes to Goodwill, tries to reduce, their use of plastic, single-use plastic items, so that they are on the right track, because they're trying to not buy more and more things, but to reduce that. And so that the idea is that the system, the economic system, will still function even though we do not purchase as much as maybe in previous decades. So how do we assess the learning? And for me, that was important that they also participated in the assessment, that they asked questions. So we did, the written assignments. I asked them to also come with questions. What can they improve in their writing? How can they improve their speaking? And then the outcomes, I was positively surprised how well they did it. And we even had one session where we spoke about ChatGPT. I know that this is a topic that comes up again and again, also in the world language classrooms. How does ChatGPT, how can you enter information in German? I asked them to use it once in the classroom where they would enter information and ask, what type of sustainable development would ChatGPT suggest that needs to be done in the Atlanta area, so that they are also aware of their language abilities, but that they also see, what can I do if I use Google Translate? What can I do if I use ChatGPT? So how can I improve my speaking, my writing, my language abilities by using the internet and all its softwares that are now available to them? So let me show you. This is what we said the learning outcomes would be. So they would have learned about different models of sustainability. And I usually start with those because that gives us a good way to enter the topic. And it also is broad because it immediately shows that it's not just the environment, but it also is, the social aspect, it is the economic aspect. So all that is part of sustainable development. That they learned how to articulate issues of sustainability in the target language by improving their vocabulary, register, comprehension, writing, and speaking skills. And we watched several short videos in the classroom with subtitles. And so that always helps. And then we had questions and discussions about that. They learned about connections between German culture and the approaches to issues of sustainability, both by the German federal and local governments, as well as NGOs. So what kind of climate activists, what do they do in Germany right now? And I'm not sure if you have heard about it, but there was a big protest going on in the middle of the semester where students and also people from the older generation were protesting at a forest that was supposed to be taken down. And we have here in Atlanta a similar topic. So we compared it with Cop City, or so-called Cop City. How, do we continue to take down forests in order to build something, or in order to take coal out of the earth? And in Germany, it was a coal mine that was supposed to produce more by taking down trees. You learn about the connections between German culture. We already did this with the governments. And so in Germany, the government plays a bigger role. We compared that to the United States. But we also, for example, talked about national parks and how in the United States, there are a number of national parks. And it took Germany a long time to create its own parks where nature is protected. So there is a national park up in the northern part of Germany, right, where the Waddensee is, where there are lots of birds that are migrating that come through this. And we talked about some of the forests and the trees that are dying. We also spoke about the catastrophe in Chernobyl and changes to the power plants in Germany. As you may know, recently they've kind of stopped all the nuclear power plants. So they're trying to invest more and more in renewable energies. Students were supposed to gain an insight into local efforts to live a more sustainable life. So what can they do in their community? How can they contribute? We had one student who presented on mental health and sustainability, and they talked about kind of the pressures on the generation, that is coming now, the fear of climate change being so overwhelming that there will be more hurricanes and more disasters, natural disasters in terms of weather instabilities, and also climate refugees. So, how can students cope with it? But how can they also see that there's a lot of positive involvement from groups, from individuals, from governments, and from international associations and organizations. They gained also new insights into the history of Germany. So what has happened, what is happening at the political level, how have things changed? And then they wrote short essays, a poem, they did some interviews. And I think that's always a nice assignment, because then they have to prepare questions and go out and ask other people about this topic. And by doing so, they also then, kind of teach that person about the UN SDGs or about the topic that they interview them about. The short documentary is a group project that works well, where they then talk into the camera or they talk behind the camera. Either way is fine. They do a final paper. And again, some of the topics were about transportation. I have one student who's writing a paper on boats and ships and kind of how much fossil fuels they emit and how they're changing things, that this will be reduced more and more. Talked about recycling, how it's different in Germany, where you have to separate your aluminum and your white glass and green glass and brown glass from your paper, and then sometimes take it to recycling containers where you then deposit it. We spoke about education, what an important aspect that is, and how we educate the next generation, that we need to do more in terms of educating our elementary school children about recycling, the usage of plastic, single-use plastic items, as well as about the trees and the plants in our area where we live, that we're more aware of our connection to nature. In terms of consumption, I already mentioned fair trade, and we didn't talk much about it, but we touched on fast fashion, how much, we consume in terms of clothing. They said, they go thrifting, so they try to use secondhand clothing so that they do not contribute to this circle of buying things and throwing it in the trash. Local farming, integration of refugees, and this is a big topic in Germany, or has been in the past few years. As you know, the refugees who've come both from Syria, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, but also from African countries, and now most recently from the Ukraine. So what can be done? What was done in the past? How can we learn from mistakes that were made? And so how can refugees be integrated? What type of language instruction do they need? What type of cultural help do they need in order to learn how to live and coexist in Germany? And we spoke about renewable energies, wind farms, solar power. We have several people who are in the engineering fields who spoke about their projects. And then they had to write a final paper. And let me just go to this one. So you have any questions or suggestions? And I know we have a little more time left. So if you're interested, I'm happy to talk more about the class or modules, but I'm also interested and eager to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rita, for that amazing presentation. Since we still have some time, we will give you all some minutes so you can actually place your questions. Feel free to make as many as you need. And in the meantime, I'd like to take this moment to mention that education for sustainable development, once again, is a very important topic for us that was recalled in the anniversary of Clever Languages. And also that this is a topic present in Honing Our Craft. That is the title of a volume of chapters about contemporary issues in classroom language teaching. Bear in mind that this has been edited by Florencia Henshaw and Kim Botowski. We're going to share some slides so you can actually get some more information about the topic. Okay, just give us 1 second. Okay, well, we're having some problems to share the screen, but I'm just gonna tell you some more information about it. So yes, here we go. Perfect. So as I was saying, this is the volume of chapters about contemporary issues. This is being written by educators and for educators, and it focuses on practical applications and suggestions while tackling contemporary issues in the language classroom. This offers 12 chapters with topics that reflect on many questions discussed in professional communities. And the goal is that this collection is useful to you, to teachers who juggle in many important decisions that they make regarding to each classroom and session that they teach. Here are some of the chapters that you will be able to find. I know the letter is a bit small, but just so you know, there are topics, as you can see, like social justice. You also have heritage language teaching. As I mentioned before, we have education for sustainable development. We have topics such as differentiated instruction, translanguaging, and many others. We will put a link now so you can actually get some more information, and you will be able to pre-order the book and get a 5% discount. Also, just so you know, Honing Our Craft is not only the book, it has inspired the hybrid conference Honing Our Craft. We will have the second edition this upcoming fall on the 7th and 8th of October. As I mentioned, is hybrid, so you will have an online version, but you also have the opportunity to join us in Chicago. We would love to meet you all there. The theme of this year is Building the Future of World Language Education. There will be 3 keynote sessions, 1 roundtable, 9 workshops, and also poster sessions. We will be opening the registration next week. Keep in the loop. And please visit our website to find out more about the conference. We will put the link right there as well. So thank you, everyone. And that being said, I think we have some questions that we could do. Our first question would be, what would you say most surprised you about students' immediate reaction or later reflections on to sustainable development and the SDGs?
Good question. I don't know what most surprised me. I mean, I've been working with the topic for many years now, and I think our students are just curious and eager to learn what they can do. And, you know, we teach in the Georgia Tech, we teach applied languages, which means we don't teach much literature. And we also offer, you know, fairy tale classes and novels and novellas and some sorts of these things, but it's not a very literature-based curriculum. So it is a very applied curriculum because we want our students to take the language and go out into the world and use it in their careers. And we have, as you may know, in the Atlanta area, there are a lot of German companies. And we have a number of students who move on to these companies, and they are just doing really great because they have learned, you know, how to use their language in that career. So I think just for them knowing or wanting to know what to do with the knowledge that they get during their college years and how to apply it in their later careers, that's the most important aspect for many of them. And so some of them take it obviously to a wholly different level and go on to, you know, study this, do their masters. We have graduate students who are doing projects on sustainability and soccer. So what is being done in the world of soccer in Germany compared to the United States. And as you know, the World Cup is coming in 26 to the United States, or the North Americas, I think they call it, and will also be here in Atlanta. So what is being done in Germany? How can we learn from each other? So, we have students who are eager to find that out and take that into their job, into their profession, their career goals, and then offer that to their employer, that knowledge that they learn when we talk about sustainability. And what we do, American soccer clubs, for example, look at sustainability differently from German soccer clubs. So we have one student who's doing a very interesting project on that. So that would be, I guess, my answer. So I'm always impressed and, surprised by my students, how wonderful they are and how eager they are to make positive change, I guess.
Fantastic. So the next person actually mentions that his or her brain is so overwhelmed about everything that we saw. This person mentions that they teach German at high school and they just touch upon recycling in Germany and some important vocabulary. So trying to tie the UN sustainable goals in the curriculum, and like the students have to do an end of semester project. The person that asked, should I have them do the project in German or in English?
Good question. I mean, we try to, especially at the more advanced levels, we try to teach everything in German. So the presentation you saw is really something that, I offer that in German to my students. So in our classes, we do everything in German. If there are questions, then we help students, if they can't find a word or an expression, then we help students find that word, or we look it up. I sometimes don't know, so I look at, my app, my Leo app, and or Google it, what is the term for something. So I would suggest to do it all in German if possible, just because it gives them, a good way to try and use it. Even, and I tell my students, even if you hesitate or you stutter or something, it's that overcoming, right, of that we all have when we speak in a foreign language, where we feel like we're not as competent as when we speak in our, native mother tongue. So I would always argue to do it in that target language. Thank you for the question.
Thanks you for the answer. The next one mentions that your presentation about sustainability being about culture has made us think about culturally sustaining pedagogies. So do you know if there is such a thing as culturally and environmentally sustaining pedagogies? And that maybe socio-ecological holistic approach to teaching and learning that seeks to nurture people and the planet. Would that fit, or does that concept actually exist?
Yeah, it does exist in the way, I guess, even in anthropology, they use it, but also we in the language classroom use it when we, for example, we had one unit which was about medicine. And I assume there's a lot going on, especially in Latin America and other countries where medicine is practiced and used in a very different way. And for example, in Germany, you use medicine in a different way, you use much more herbal medicines, you use more homeopathy than in the United States. And so we compared, what do students take here when they're sick, when they're sniffling of a cough or something, compared to, our partners in Germany. And so that in itself was interesting because that's based on culture, right? What do I feel comfortable using as a remedy? We talked about, recipes that we know from our grandparents, and many of them are herbal. So it's chamomile tea, it's onion milk, or something that you drink when you think, you need a little boost in energy. So I think that in itself is like cultural difference. How do you approach, how do you work with the environment? What does the environment provide to us? And a lot of American medicines are also based on plants. They've just taken them to another level, where it's there's a lot of chemicals in there. And I do take them too because they're helpful, but there are different cultural approaches to medicine and herbal remedies. And I think you can see that, and we've lost so much knowledge, right? And I think that's really important to keep that. And so many more books have come out about tales, even, legends of, how do you use plans in everyday life? How can you concentrate better if you eat such and such, or if you drink such and such, or smell something? You know, I know there's this whole industry now with lavender, and I've even seen it here in the supermarket, lavender little you know, plants that you can put into your room. Just breathing it in, you feel calmer. So I think there's a, not rebirth, but I think there's this going back to see, you know, what does nature offer? What can we offer in nature, rather than using all the plants for our own good, but not, you know, providing back to kind of the planet. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. That's a great approach. Also, our next question says, do you know if there is a list available for school districts that are aligned or dedicated to ESD?
Good question. I do not know. And I must say, I don't know if there is anything. I would think that maybe the language organizations have materials. For example, I've spoken to colleagues at other colleges and also here in high schools through the AETG, which is the American Association for Teachers of German. So there we share information. I know that there are a lot of Facebook groups where, you know, teachers and college professors, instructors share PowerPoints or interesting, I don't know, new music. There's, for example, a song from in Germany that is kind of the environmental song, the climate activist song that we also played in class. So, but I don't know if there is something on the, I assume there's nothing on the national level, but I'm not sure, maybe within the state that, you know, within your county, that there are world language advisors who have information on this, but I don't know. Thank you.
Thanks to you. And the next question is on the same line. What about your university, the entire university where you teach? Is it dedicated to ESD?
Yes. Yes, I must say, yes, they are. And so it happened over the course of the last 10 years. So there was the quality enhancement plan as to what can Georgia Tech do to address global issues. And when our new president came, Angel Cabrera, he brought with him a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience with the SDGs. And so he made it possible for the Institute to approach the SDGs and to endorse them. I know that not all colleagues in all colleges teach the SDGs as yet, but there is an institute-wide initiative. Just recently, we established a sustainability committee, institute-wide committee, that then also got funding to give out grants to change the teaching, to incorporate the UN SDGs into mechanical engineering, into aerospace engineering, into biology, into health education. And I was lucky because I was on this committee and we got all these wonderful proposals that talk about how can we incorporate the SDGs into the classroom at various levels. And there were wonderful ideas from all sorts of disciplines. So Georgia Tech very much is behind the SDGs and is behind sustainability education, because we think that's, you know, one of the pressing issues of our time.
Fantastic. And how do you think that your unit would translate to the high school level?
Yeah, good question. We try to work closer with the high schools in the area. So some of us have also served, you know, as AP readers. I was AP German reader last year. I know that some colleagues are doing it. So that way we also get the information as to what our colleagues in the middle schools and high schools are doing. And I think there is an exchange. So we have yearly or biannual, what is it? No, it's like, yeah, every semester we meet once. And so we exchange best practices. And I think that is really helpful to talk to colleagues. What do you do when you teach, you know, sustainability? And we have some colleges who teach it a bit differently, but it's good to know how they do it. And I think in terms of especially AP classes, but also other German classes and textbooks, And we spoke about, CLET has a number of textbooks where you can see and can use these already prepared assignments and practices for students. We talk about, environmental issues. How do you change things? So I think that exchange between high school teachers, college instructors, publishers, and then at conferences, we share information, but especially these best practices, both from high school teachers and from college instructors. That's what I have, enjoyed the most, because I learn a lot from my colleagues at the school level.
Fantastic. Everyone, remember that you still have some time to make questions. I'm gonna go for the next one, which is basically, if you could give us more practical examples on how to empower students in taking action for ESD, and also very important, how to help them not feel detached for the situation. For example, when talking about climate refugees and talking about, for example, South world countries or countries that are in war, how to make them feel actually connected somehow to the situation and not feeling completely detached from those problems.
Okay. Yeah, no, thank you. Especially after the pandemic, I guess now we have the opportunity to use Zoom. It depends on what time zone you're in, but you can connect to, speakers in other countries or classes in other countries. So I think bringing in speakers who are not me, somebody else who's talking in front of the class is really helpful, because then students feel like, oh, I'm using the language actually not just to talk to my teacher, to my peers, but I'm using it to make, content exchange. And so I very much enjoyed bringing in speakers, and they were great because they spoke a little, less fast. They used not such difficult language sometimes, or, I helped out with some of the vocabulary. So I think bringing in other people to talk about an issue then also shows students, that they're not by themselves, they're not alone. And I know that many of our students are very active in different clubs. So we also have a very active German club, but we also have lots of other clubs in, I don't know, motorsports and other things, where they talk about, electric vehicles and how can we improve charging stations and batteries for cars. And so I think if you address a number of levels, and even in economics, we have students who are doing an internship now this summer as sustainability officers. And so they're saying, I want to see, what is actually being done. Is it greenwashing that the companies do, that they say, we want to go all natural and climate, neutral, we want to produce better things. So I think they have an eye, the students know, and they keep an eye on, that they cannot be fooled. So I think it's important for them to understand that their task is also to hold companies, local governments accountable for what we do. And, as participants in a democracy, they are empowered to make their voices heard. And I think they know that. And I encourage them, to write articles. Some of our students are participants. They just published a magazine, Building a City. So one of the students wrote about affordable housing, the lack of affordable housing in Atlanta. We've kind of created this beltline, but a lot of it was gentrification. And so now, we need to take a step back and say, hey, we have the need for more housing that is affordable for people who don't earn that much money. So I think these checks and balances, and I see that in the United States, I think that's very important. I think, if we hear these students and listen to their voices, I think that's what empowers them. And I encourage them to, go and speak at different events or listen to speakers who come to campus, who share their ideas. We have the former US Secretary of the Energy come to campus. So there are all these events where I feel, if they participate, then they learn more and can use that knowledge and take it to their families or their communities or churches or, temples or wherever they go. And just by that small distribution of knowledge, I think we can make a great, great leap forward, hopefully.
Fantastic. So let's make two more questions. The first one would be if there is a connection between ESD and ESG scores.
So the ESD is the Education for Sustainable Development, and my students also got that mixed up with the ESG. So that's the educational, the sustainability, and then the social and the governance aspect. And so that's educate. What is it? And sorry, I apologize. I have to take it back. So environmental, social, and governance is the ESG. See, even I get it confused. So that's what we look at, I guess, when we look at companies. How do they produce the items that they, I don't know, the products, and then how do they do their investment also? And I know, for example, at Georgia Tech, there is an effort to divest away from fossil fuels into more renewable energies. I know a lot of colleges and counties have gone in that direction, that they don't want to support fossil fuels as much anymore, but invest more and more in renewable energies. And the same with the companies, and the investment that we do when we buy stocks is that you look at the ESG, what factor is it? Are they actually doing good for the environment or not? So that's the difference. The one is the Education for Sustainable Development, and the other one is, what do we say? Environmental, social, and governance aspects. Thank you. Good question.
Thanks to you. And our final question basically is that a lot of people fell in love with your amazing flag with all the objectives, and they all want to know they just want to know where did you get it, if they could get it in other languages, and the details that you could give us.
Okay, and I got it online. So there is a lot of, kind of merchandise online that you can get. And my students use it. I use it in the classroom. Then I fold it up again and we kind of open it up again and look at it and see, which ones of these UN SDGs are actually important to the issue that you want to go out and tackle in the world when you take a job, or which ones are important to you and your family. So yes, I purchased them online. I know there's some pins also that are available online. There's some, I think, tote bags. So there's a number of things to show off, your support for the UN SDGs. Thank you for asking.
Thanks to you. That was our last question. Once again, Brita, many thanks for this webinar. It was fantastic and it was great insight. Before we begin, everyone, please don't leave. We are very pleased to inform that the Language Connects Foundation is announcing tomorrow a new award that we are very glad to sponsorship, which will celebrate and reward K-12 educators, higher education educators, and college or university students who have effectively integrated the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals into their classroom curriculum and projects. Again, this is coming tomorrow. You can reach out for more information, and the name of the award is the LCF Glad World Languages Award for Sustainable Development Education in the World Language Classroom. Again, we're putting all the information in the chat so you can keep this in mind and so you can check it out. Also, if you have any other questions that you couldn't ask to Brita today, please send them back to us because we're gonna just give them to her. And also, if you have any doubts about ESD that you would like to ask us, please feel free to write us to info@cledwl.com or to marketing@cledwl.com. We are very happy to help you and to be there for you. So once again, thank you all for being here and have a nice evening.